What if everything you thought was holding this family together was already broken, and tonight the truth finally explodes? This is the moment no one can take back, and it changes everything forever. So hit subscribe right now because you do not want to miss what happens next. This felt like the moment everything finally started to fall apart. Not suddenly, not loudly, but in a slow, heavy way that had been building for years beneath quiet conversations, forced smiles, and unspoken truths. The kind of moment where you realize something has already ended long before anyone had the courage to admit it. And as the scene begins, there is a strange stillness, almost like everyone knows what is coming, but no one wants to be the first to say it out loud, because once it is said, there is no going back. And that is what makes it so intense, because this is not just another disagreement. This is not just another emotional conversation. This is the point where everything changes, where the illusion that has been carefully held together finally starts to crack. And what makes it even more gripping is how it connects back to everything we have seen before. All the moments that once seemed small now feel like pieces of a much bigger story. A story that has been heading toward this exact moment for a very long time. And as we are pulled deeper into it, the emotions become impossible to ignore. There is frustration, there is sadness, there is confusion, but most of all, there is a sense of inevitability, because deep down, everyone knows this outcome was always a possibility, and now it is finally here, unfolding in real time. And yet, even as it happens, there is hesitation, there are pauses, there are moments where it feels like the truth is right there, ready to come out, but something holds it back, something keeps delaying the inevitable. And that only makes it more powerful, because the longer it is held back, the stronger it becomes, until it can no longer be contained. And as the conversation begins to move forward, it does not go directly to the heart of the issue. Instead, it circles around it, focusing on things that seem important but are really just distractions from what everyone knows is the real topic. And this creates a sense of tension that keeps building, because you are waiting for the moment when everything finally comes into focus, when the truth is no longer avoided. And as the discussion continues, it becomes clear that this is not just about emotions. This is also about decisions, about consequences, about what happens next when everything that once held people together is no longer enough. And that is where things start to feel even more complicated, because now it is not just about feelings, it is about reality. It is about how lives will change, how dynamics will shift, and how people will move forward from something that once defined them. And in the middle of all this, there are different reactions. Some people seem ready to accept what is happening, while others are still trying to hold on, still trying to make sense of something that no longer makes sense. And that contrast adds another layer of intensity, because it shows just how differently people process the same situation. And as these reactions play out, it becomes harder and harder to ignore the truth that has been sitting just beneath the surface, waiting to be acknowledged. And then, slowly, almost carefully, it begins to emerge, not all at once, but in pieces, in small admissions, in subtle shifts in tone, in words that carry more weight than they initially seem to. And as those pieces come together, the full picture starts to form, and it becomes clear that this is not just a temporary setback. This is something final, something that cannot be undone. And that realization hits differently for everyone involved. Some accept it, some resist it, and some are caught somewhere in between, trying to figure out how to respond to a reality they may not have been fully prepared for. And as the moment continues to unfold, the emotional weight becomes even heavier, because now there is no pretending, now there is no avoiding it. This is happening, and there is no way to turn back. And yet, even in that clarity, there is still a sense of disbelief, as if part of everyone involved is still hoping that somehow things might change, that somehow this might not be the end, even though all signs point to the opposite. And that internal conflict adds even more depth to the situation, because it shows how difficult it is to let go of something that once meant so much, even when it is clear that it can no longer continue in the same way. And as the conversation reaches its most intense point, the truth is finally spoken, clearly, directly, in a way that leaves no room for misunderstanding. And in that moment, everything shifts. Because once the truth is out there, it cannot be taken back. It cannot be softened. It cannot be ignored. It simply exists, and everyone has to deal with it in their own way. And that is where the real impact of the moment is felt. Not just in what is said, but in how it is received, in the silence that follows, in the reactions that reveal more than words ever could. And as the scene begins to settle, there's a sense that something significant has just happened, something that will change everything moving forward. And yet, even as one chapter comes to a close, there is still a feeling that the story is not over, that this is just one part of a much larger journey, and that what comes next may be just as important as what just happened. And that is what keeps the tension alive, even as the moment itself begins to fade. Because now the focus shifts from what has ended to what will happen next. And that uncertainty creates a new kind of suspense, one that is not about what has already been revealed, but about what is still to come. And as we continue to follow this unfolding story, it becomes clear that while one relationship may have reached its breaking point, the effects of that break will continue to ripple outward, influencing everything and everyone connected to it. And that is what makes this moment so powerful, because it is not just an ending, it is also a beginning, a turning point that will shape everything that follows. And as the weight of that realization settles in, it becomes impossible to look away, because now the story has entered a new phase, one filled with questions, possibilities, and the undeniable truth that nothing will ever be the same again. And just when it feels like everything has been laid out, everything has been understood, there is still one more layer, one more emotion, one more reaction that adds depth to what we have just witnessed. And that is what keeps the audience fully engaged, because there is always something more beneath the surface, something waiting to be discovered, something that makes you want to keep watching, to keep understanding, to keep following the journey as it continues to unfold. And even as this moment reaches its conclusion, there is a sense that it is not truly over, that its impact will continue to be felt long after the conversation is ended. And that is what makes it so unforgettable, because it is not just a scene, it is a turning point, a moment that defines everything that comes after and leaves a lasting impression that cannot be ignored. As the weight of everything that has just unfolded begins to settle, there's a strange shift in energy, not a relief, but something quieter, something more uncertain. Because when a moment like this finally happens, when the truth is spoken and the illusion is gone, what comes next is often even more complicated than what came before. And that is exactly what starts to unfold here. Because now that everything has been brought into the open, there is no longer a shared version of reality to hold on to. Instead, there are individual perspectives, emotions, and reactions, all moving in different directions. And that creates a new kind of tension, one that is less explosive, but far more unsettling, because it lingers. It stretches out into every silence, every glance, every word that is said, and even the words that are not said. And as each person begins to process what has happened, it becomes clear that while the event itself may be over, its impact is only just beginning. And this is where the story takes on a deeper layer. Because now it is no longer about whether something is ending. It is about how people respond to that ending, how they redefine themselves, how they adjust to a reality that may feel unfamiliar or even uncomfortable. And that is not something that happens instantly. It is a process, one that unfolds slowly and often unpredictably. And as we watch that process begin, there are moments that feel almost reflective, as if everything that has led to this point is being revisited, not directly, but through subtle reactions, through the way people carry themselves, through the way they choose to speak or remain silent. And these moments add a sense of depth that goes beyond the immediate situation, because they remind us that what we are seeing now is connected to a much larger story, one that has been developing over time and is now entering a completely new phase. And as that realization settles in, there is also a growing awareness that things cannot return to the way they were, because even if some elements remain the same, the foundation has shifted. And once that happens, everything else must adjust around it. And that adjustment is not always smooth, it is not always clear, and it certainly is not always comfortable. And that is what keeps the tension alive, even after the main event has passed, because now we are watching something evolve, something transform in real time, and there is no clear roadmap for how it will unfold. And as this new phase begins to take shape, there are moments where it feels like acceptance might be possible, where it seems like there is a path forward that could bring some sense of stability. But those moments are often followed by hesitation, by doubt, by the lingering question of whether true acceptance is even achievable in a situation like this. And that internal conflict adds another layer of complexity, because it shows that even when the truth is clear, the emotions surrounding it are not always easy to resolve. And as these emotions continue to surface, there are also attempts to make sense of everything, to find meaning, to understand why things happened the way they did, and whether they could have been different. And these questions do not always have clear answers, but they are an important part of the process because they reflect the natural human response to change, especially change that feels significant and deeply personal. And as these reflections unfold, there is also a shift in focus toward the future, because while the past may explain how things reached this point, it does not determine what happens next. And that is where the sense of uncertainty becomes even more pronounced, because now the possibilities are open-ended. And while that can be seen as an opportunity, it can also feel overwhelming, especially when there is no clear direction to follow. And as each person begins to navigate this uncertainty, there are choices to be made, decisions that will shape what comes next. And these decisions are not always easy. They are influenced by emotions, by past experiences, by expectations, and by the desire to move forward in a way that feels right, even if it is not entirely clear what that means. And as these choices begin to take form, there is also a noticeable shift in dynamics, because relationships that once existed in a certain way are now being redefined. Boundaries are being reconsidered, roles are being reevaluated, and that process can create both distance and clarity, depending on how it unfolds. And as we continue to observe these changes, there is a growing sense that this is not just about one moment or one decision, but about a series of transformations that will continue to develop over time. And that is what makes this part of the story so compelling, because it is not confined to a single scene or a single conversation. It extends beyond that, into something much larger, something that will continue to evolve and reveal itself in ways that may not yet be fully visible. And as this evolution continues, there are also moments of reflection that bring everything back to a more personal level, moments that highlight the emotional core of what is happening and remind us that behind all the decisions and changes, there are real feelings, real experiences, and real challenges that each person must face in their own way. And these moments create a sense of connection that goes beyond the specifics of the situation, because they tap into something more universal: the experience of change, the process of letting go, and the effort to move forward, even when the path doesn't always feel clear. Shift that will define everything that follows. And that realization brings with it a mix of emotions, a sense of closure combined with a sense of anticipation. Because while something has undeniably come to an end, there is also the undeniable truth that the story itself is still in motion, still evolving, still drawing us in with the promise that there is more ahead. And that is what leaves a lasting impression, because it reminds us that even when something feels complete, it can also be the beginning of something entirely new.